Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a Monday morning, bright and early. Cafe just kind of opened up here. A little bit slow the first hour of the day. It seems like we're more of a come and hang out place than we are the stopping for morning coffee thing. But we're listening to some Roost, a record I never got until recently because it's a collection. But what I never realized about it was this is a compilation of stuff from the 10-inch era that came up before as the 12-inch era launches. It's number 1201. And I don't think there's a 1202. 1203 is that Stitt and Eddie Davis Lockjaw at the Roost, I think it is, or Birdland, some live record where they're kind of battling each other. Then they stopped the 1200 series and moved to the 2200 series. And I'm not sure exactly what their thinking was there. My guess is that there was a number of other 1200 sequences already in jazz. Pacific Records had one. Atlantic Records had one. There's at least one or two other ones because 12-inch record, 12-inch sequence, 1200 sequence became like kind of a normal, I think, approach. But yeah, they went with 1201, 1203, and then went to the 2200 stuff. But this is really just a part of that early LP era. It wasn't until I saw the 1201 there that I realized the vintage of this session. And by session, like, it's got so many of the greats on it. Sonny Stitt, Bud Powell, Stan Getz, Johnny Smith. Eddie Bonamere is a fantastic Harlem kind of gospel piano player. Lee Konitz, Dizzy Gillespie, Eddie Lockjaw Davis. Brew Moore with Machito, which is a real Latin-flavored number. I mean, a lot of it's pretty classic Roost 10-inch era stuff. And when you read that list of names from the early 50s, you can't help but be impressed and recognize how important Roost Records is in the chronology and the linealogy, is that the right word? Even doesn't sound right. Of Roost Records versus the jazz canon at this point. You can't say that Blue Note was more cutting edge or leading the sound of the music at this point. Blue Note's doing a kind of a real myriad of sounds. They're licensing stuff from Europe with some of the Bud Powell, some of the Sidney Bechet, some of the Dizzy Gillespie stuff that you get on Blue Note. That Horn of Plenty, that's not a Blue Note session. So Blue Note sounds very disparate and very unorganized at this point still. And it's not really until they move into the 1500 sequence where Blue Note really hits their stride. Had a little interruption there for a second, but Roost, no doubt, is a legacy that's undervalued today by collectors and by historians even. I mean, Teddy Reig and company just really did a lot of the groundbreaking stuff, and his departure from Savoy to creating the Roost label and his street hustler reputation and his knowledge and ear to the street really connected him with a lot of what was cutting edge and leading the pack in jazz in the early 50s. And there's just no way you can really compare. Riverside isn't even in the ballpark at this point. They're doing very much New Orleans stuff. There's a few things that they started to do, like Don Elliott, but we're talking 53, 54. Roost goes back earlier than that. Teddy Reig is a legend in this music, and Roost is definitely a deserving honorary label that deserves more recognition than it gets. And again, when you're listing out names like Bud Powell and Sonny Stitt and Stan Getz and Johnny Smith and Dizzy Gillespie and Lee Konitz, Eddie Davis, and even some Charlie Parker, it's legendary material. And so it's just a cool piece that, I probably should have had a long time ago. It's not that expensive, not that hard to find. But we're going to do a Capitol episode coming up real soon here. But I have some Capitol stuff coming in the mail that I want to add to the episode. And I got some Decca and RCA stuff that's also came in the mail that I want to show you as well. But I want to wait for this other stuff to show up. So we're kind of doing a little splice episode in here right now. One of the things people ask me often is, how long do I think the vinyl revolution is back for? And I keep waiting for it to kind of wane, if I'm honest. The generation that grew up on vinyl is old enough to have grandkids now, and there's always that saying that it skips a generation, and that kids, teenagers will kind of look at their grandparent as a big influence, and they'll often my screen goes black sometimes. I hate I have to do that, but they'll often look to their grandparents as an influence for some of their interests and art ideologies and all that stuff. And I think some of that's this generation looking back to their grandparents going, oh, my dad had records in the 80s. Kind of cool to have that now. Do I think it's sustainable? No, I think it's going to flatline. And I think what you're going to end up with is a glut of vinyl on the market that's being printed now, that some of it's reissues of earlier material, some of it's current material. But I think you can already go into some used record stores and find a lot of copies of modern pop stuff on vinyl sitting there used. That's happened to me a few times. And I'm not super connected to the scene in terms of what's happening right now. And I know they're opening some new record plants. I'd love to say it's going to be sustainable for the foreseeable future. But if I had to look 100 years into the future, well, do I think they'll still be pressing records the way they are right now? Probably not. I mean, who knows how music will be formulated by that point. You'll probably be able to think about it and it'll just pop up into the speakers in your home or something. But, I mean, it's come so far so fast just in my lifetime. It's changed so much. Not always for the better, you know what I mean? There's a different relationship with music today than there is back when I was a kid. When you spent your hard-earned $7 to buy Motley Crue, Shout Out the Devil, you listen to that cassette tape front, backwards, forwards, upside down, in the shower, outside in the cold, in the barn. I mean, you just got to know every word inside the liner notes. I mean, if there were lyrics, little fold-outs, you got to know that. So you really connected with the art, and I think that's changing some. I mean, I think it's changed a lot. When you download or stream something, it just becomes so much more disposable and so much harder to remember. What was that record called? What was that song called? Who did that song? I mean, I struggle all the time when I'm DJing a set with something I downloaded a long time ago. I'm like, oh, it'd be the perfect song to play right now, but I can't remember who did it. And I played the song maybe a dozen times, but when you don't have that vinyl memory link and interact with it on such a regular basis, and that doesn't happen with the vinyl. It does sometimes. There's times I'm looking for an old RnB song. I'm like, oh man, who did that song again? But I mean, it is what it is. Do I think the vinyl thing's going to go away? No. I do think the old generation of the audiophiles and purists are an endangered species. Will there always be people buying expensive gear? Yeah. And will they probably always buy vinyl to show off their gear? Probably, yeah. But I think that's a small niche. I think the convenience of modern music is going to be more appealing to so many people. And I think that the value of some of these new pressings and reissues will probably bottom at some point. And I'm not saying they'll become worthless, but I think original pressings from the 20th century will maintain a heritage value. And I'd like to think a Tone Poet 100 years from now will be like, oh, this is a cool piece, even though it was a repressing of something that came out much earlier. I mean, it's hard to really know how collector markets will work. I mean, they do trading baseball cards with vintage players on them, and those modern series of Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth, those cards can have some value down the road, but they're never as valuable as an old Ty Cobb or as an old Hannes Wagner, you know. So, judging from that, there will be ups and downs. And if you're in it for the investment, I'd be careful. If you're in it because of the tactile enjoyment and the love of the music, I mean, then who cares? If you love it, then that's all the reason you need to do it. And fuck all the other harbingers. So, I don't know, it's just an interesting thing. People ask me all the time, and I don't really know. And who does? No one can really read the future. But I think if you love it, stick with it. And if people do kind of abandon ship, that will make a lot of stuff more affordable for the masses who are still collecting vinyl for the love of it. I mean, when all the people who are kind of hangers-on or doing it for the image of it, wanting to be seen as cool by their friends, when all those people kind of go away and get their job, you know, in their office building and go to work every day and get a wife, and the wife says, you got to get rid of half of your stuff to move in with me in this home we're going to buy, I think a lot of vinyl collections will be sold. And I think that's always been the case. You know what I mean? Going back to the CD era, going back to the original vinyl era. People always move on from their stuff and their hobbies and their interests, and life kind of makes dictations on them that they can't really help or avoid. So enough on that. Again, it's just my 2 cents. I don't really know much better than that kind of little bit of insight. We're going to talk about Capitol real soon, but right now I want to talk about the the age of the crossbreeding of music. It's kind of nuts how in this era, the 50s primarily, blues, jazz, the jump blues, rock and roll, rhythm and blues, it's all kind of mushed together. And I think to the older generation, it was all that new kids music brought to you by Erskine Hawkins and the great Louis Jordan, and then of course the young Ray Charles and Sam Cooke, and I mean Big Joe Turner. The blues, rock and roll, rhythm and blues, jazz, it's all kind of transgendered for a moment, and nothing sounds like the genres that we've come to know them as being. One of the great examples is this says Dance the Rock and Roll. It's an Atlantic compilation, 8013. And it's kind of all over the board with what kind of stuff is on here. Got some Willis Jackson, some Tommy Ridgely, some Chuck Calhoun, some Joe Morris, some Arnett Cobb. I mean, it's really covering a pretty wide spectrum of stuff here. But the music's very convoluted in this moment, and things aren't very clearly defined. I have numerous compilations that are called rock and roll, that are really rhythm and blues. Sometimes they're jump blues. Sometimes they're straight blues. I mean, the roots are so tangled, it's hard to really discern. But it's funny how many times I've bought something that said rock and roll and have it be very little much of the rock and roll as we kind of recognize it. And Ray Charles is one of the great crossover artists of that time. Atlantic was really an important label. And I've discussed this before, kind of mentioned how there's two different series of Ray Charles records. There's the stuff he does in the 1200 sequence, the great Ray Charles, number 1259. And this is some playing. He's a great player. Milt Jackson and Ray Charles, I think it's 1279. Of course, Milt has that great pedigree with the MJQ and the Detroit scene. Ray Charles at Newport. So it shows you how serious a cat Brother Ray is. It looks like he's even holding an alto there. Just an amazing talent. Fathead Ray Charles presents David Newman. I think Ray appears in a couple songs, that's if I remember. Fathead was an arranger for Charles for a long time. The Genius of Ray Charles. Not a nickname they throw around very lightly in the music business at that point, especially for a black man. The Genius. I mean, that kind of sums it up. Soul Meeting, again with Milt Jackson. This one comes a little bit later, 1360, so probably 58, 59. The Genius After Hours. And that's the 1200 stuff, but concurrently with that is running the 8000 sequence, which is much more R&B, early rock and roll, and the blues. And there's some pop mixed in there as well, but it's all kind of interchangeable and hasn't clearly defined itself. The mud's pretty stirred up. This is 8006 Ray Charles Rock and Roll, which actually came out, I think, first with this cover, Hallelujah and I Love Her So. But I'm not sure which one. I think this one was the second cover. I think that's the first cover. But you can just hear the spirit of this guy, the black church, the blues, the gospel, the soul. It's all just pouring out of him. And he's just got endless ideations, like a Coltrane, but in a whole totally different lane. Yes, indeed, Ray Charles, 8025, kind of a cool cover. Again, much more in the rhythm and blues side of things. 8029, What I'd Say, Brother Ray. Fantastic, fantastic song. One of the ones that shakes the foundations of what music sounded like at that point. Ray Charles in person, Atlantic. I mean, just an incredible talent. The Genius sings the blues, Ray Charles. And he's one of those singers that he can do a blues record and actually sing the blues. There's a lot of gals out there especially doing so-and-so sings the blues. And like, there wasn't a whole lot of blues on that record. Instead of them playing blues numbers and having blues progressions, if you ain't got some gospel in your Hallelujah, I mean, it ain't the blues. The blues has to have some personality inflected upon it. You can't just be doing a song that's the blues and I'm going to play it like they do it. You got to put you into it. You got to express how you feel about it. If you ain't doing it, you ain't doing it. Twist with Ray Charles. This also has a second cover, which Atlantic doesn't seem nearly as guilty of that as some labels. This is I think this one might be the stereo version. Probably the mono here. But again, this one doesn't really intimate that it's a collection, but it certainly is. And this is a Ray Charles story that came out later. So again, just an incredible body of work there in the 50s from Brother Ray in 2 different serial numbers as those lanes are kind of diverging. He's one of the people that helps to clear the water and say, jazz is going to sound and look more like this, and the blues is going to sound more like this, but pop and R&B is going to go that way. Another guy I want to talk about real quick is a guy that's kind of forgotten about somewhat, and he's again in that crosshairs of jazz and blues and rhythm and blues and rock and roll, and that's Junior Walker. And he's got some of that Texas blues R&B sound going on. If you like King Curtis, if you like some Illinois Jackette, you're going to be down with what Junior Walker's about. He was a Motown guy, and I don't think he was from Detroit. I think he was from the South, if I remember. I'm not positive. He could be a Detroit guy. A lot of the guys from the South ended up in Detroit, obviously. But when he signs with Motown, Motown kind of starts a third imprint. They already had the Motown label. They had the Tamla that had the Stevie Wonder and the Marvin Gaye on it. Then they started the Soul imprint, which was the third Motown logo. So when you're collecting Motown, that is a Motown record. Berry Gordy and Company. And this is Junior Walker and the All-Stars Shotgun. And Junior Walker plays tenor. Pretty sure he plays a tenor. I'm pretty sure he does. He might play alto once in a while. But I think he's a tenorman. But he's got a lot of that Texas tenor sound. A lot of barbecue blues, baked beans coming out of the horn. Like he's just got that feel and that groove. But here he is at Motown doing kind of current songs with a real R&B jazz feel, and they've taken the words out and they're using the horn to replace it. And again, that shows you how interchangeable a lot of this music is. And is it jazz? No, it's more rhythm and blues. Is it pop? Well, it's got some pop sensibility because they're doing some Motown and some poppy stuff. But again, it's that cross-referencing of everything that's happening in the scene at that point that makes a lot of the stuff hard to define and makes it muddy for us when we try to define it as listeners and fans because it was so uncertain even at the time what was what. Shotgun, great song. Roadrunner's a great song. Shakin' Finger Pop. Hot Chop. Fun stuff. And that's the Junior Walker thing, is that these are fun records. Soul Session. Talk about great records to play in the coffee shop. They have that shuffle, that groove, that beat. 703 Roadrunner, one of my favorite album covers from that era. Just fantastic. Junior Walker Live, the All-Stars, Greatest Hits compilation. These are all on the Soul label. What Does It Take to Win Your Love? We're starting into the late 60s here. 726, I love that cover with all the gas station logos. And this kind of more from the psychedelic era in the late 60s. So great stuff. Again, it all intermingles and crossbreeds endlessly. And we'll wrap this video up here in a second.